By 1963, we had a constitution for Tibet. Now, in that constitution, he mandated there be a provision to impeach the Dalai Lama. Can you imagine, we just lost our country. We all lost ourselves. Most of our parents, I'm sure, were traumatized then. But then there's a provision which says that the parliament and others could gather and impeach the Dalai Lama. That became very controversial because no one would have thought of impeaching the Dalai Lama, but he mandated that provision be there because everybody has to be subservient to the constitution. And by 1963 also, in the parliament, we elected a woman representative. So I don't know when Australia had women representative in the parliament, but Tibetans had in 1963. I know for sure Switzerland had in 1970s. So we're a couple of decades ahead of them. So it was mandated. So the point being that every 5-10 years, His Holiness, by his own initiative, introduced major reforms in democratization of the Tibetan society. By 2001, we had the first election of the Kalun Tripa, my predecessor. And then in 2011, His Holiness, as I said on March 10th last year, said he's going to devolve all his political power. And the final round of election took place on March 20th. Now, Tibetan election is unlike, Michael, Australian election is neither constituency-based or provincial-based or national-based. It's cross-continent-based because Tibetans are in 40-plus countries. So when you campaign, you have to campaign cross continents. I remember, I think if I'm not wrong, in 7 days, I was in Delhi, Zurich, Boston, Toronto, DC, and back, because Tibetans live all over. And then, by now, in the last 50 years, the Tibetan democracy has matured in the sense Tibetans from Alaska to Australia voted on single day. Our election rule is very strict. If you don't vote on that day, disqualified. Now, from people in Ladakh, the borders of Tibet, on March 20th, it was minus 40 degrees in some of the mountain tops. Still, the local election commissioner, officials, they took ballot boxes on the backs of yaks and donkeys, went up the mountains for a couple of days, and had the nomads come down from tents and voted, and they went down to the valleys and counted. And then there's a Tibetan settlement called Bandra, extremely hot compared to Australia, much hotter than Australia also, even hotter than Brisbane maybe. Still, maybe 40 degrees, they also came out and voted. When I say voted, they were not voting in the central heating or air-conditioned rooms. They were voting out in the open, in the heat. So they voted, and all these were counted. And finally, result was declared, and I got elected. But between the March 10th and the March 20th, when His Holiness decided to devolve all his political power, I went through a bit of anxious moments. Because who can fill in the shoes of His Holiness Dalai Lama? Then normally, in normal democracy, politicians can give family reasons to withdraw. I was thinking, do I have any reason that I could come out with? My daughter is too young, or my wife, But then, the point is that Tibetan cause, it's part movement and part democratic governance. So in democratic governance, you can give family reasons and get away with it. But because it's a struggle, it's a cause, to step back, to withdraw from the movement, it's almost like a betrayal to your cause, betrayal to the legacy of your forefathers, betrayal to those people who have died for Tibet. So there's not much room, and he left only 10 days. So I held on. Then I thought, deep in my heart, and most of our Tibetans believed, and we all have repeated petitions from all over the world requesting His Holiness, appealing His Holiness to stay on as our political leader as well. But then he said, nothing doing, I have decided my mind. And by end of April, we had this special session. Tibetans from all over the world came, 500 plus, final appeal to His Holiness. And then the one mistake we made, we thought we had hope because Tibetans from all over the world had gathered. We had one line, we said, if His Holiness could remain just a titular head, just a nominal head, like the King of England, because Queen of England, but he's a male, so he's the King of England. And he looked at it, he said, "You want me to be like King of England? Then first bring me a queen." We completely forgot that he's a monk. To ask him to be a King of England was the last thing, we should have thought. But sometimes too many cooks spoiled the broth, so to speak. So many people came, and that's the language we used. Had we maybe could have said something like nominal head or titular head, that could have, that more neutral, that perhaps we had a shot. But he said, "Bring my queen." He was a bit disturbed, and then nothing doing. I've decided, now you're all on your own, stand on your feet. For the last 60 years, I've held on to your hand and made sure you stand on your own feet. Now I want you to see walking. That's a big challenge. And then, obviously, because that role was mine, and I went through a lot of analysis, and I thought, paralysis by analysis, Peter. I said, there's no more analysis. In the historical context, given the rise of China, and everything, and given the challenges that is taking place in Tibet, there's not much analysis that I can do. And I thought myself, this is my karma. This is my destiny. This is what I have to do, because this is a Tibetan cause, and Tibetan ought to lead our cause. Sooner or later, sooner the better. Then with that, I stepped forward, and now it's been 10 months. So far, I'm doing the best I can and determined to work very hard, traveling around, very hectic. But sadly, the situation inside Tibet has gone from bad to worse. Obviously now, 42 cases of self-immolations, of which 35 or so have died. And then, all this happened, actually, more self-immolations this year, in the last 6 months, than all the self-immolations in the last whole year. So that means there has been an increase in self-immolations. That sends a very strong message to all of us. Especially to me, it's personal, because the first self-immolation was in '98 and second was in 2009. But since last year, March 16th of last year, Mr. Phuntsok was the one who started last year. Since then, the 90+% of self-immolation has taken place, so which coincides with my election and with my position. And then, now 42 people have died, have committed self-immolations. And the message that they're sending is they want to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama return to Tibet. They want to have basic freedom. And it's been covered in the media. The question obviously is why it's happening. The macro answer is pretty simple: occupation of Tibet and repression of Tibetan people. But immediate reasons are, since 2008, there was a massive uprising protest in 100 different counties of Tibetan areas. And since then, instead of responding positively, more liberally, unfortunately, the Chinese government has clamped down more. Now, for example, Lhasa and Tibet Autonomous Region is essentially shut down for tourists to go. Sharpshooters on rooftops, military, whether plain dress or in uniform, walking up and down the streets of Lhasa. And in monasteries also, it was there before, but then more intensified campaign to demonize His Holiness Dalai Lama. How would you feel if you revere someone, you are asked to denounce him by stamping on his picture or bad-mouthing him? These are the immediate reasons why Tibetans have started to taking drastic actions like self-immolations. And also, in China as a whole, but particularly in Tibet, there is no room or space for freedom of speech. If you protest, you get arrested. If you have demonstration, you get arrested. If you have hunger strike, you get arrested. They're not just arrested, often tortured. Sometimes you disappear. Now, because of this kind of compulsion, Tibetans are thinking and they're analyzing and saying, might as well commit self-immolation. Because in February of this year, there were hundreds of protesters, and 8 of them were shot dead. That happened during Chinese New Year, as the Chinese leaders were celebrating the New Year. Tibetans came out, peacefully demonstrated, but they were shot at, and 8 of them died. Because of the situation, it seems Tibetans are thinking perhaps self-immolation is the only way, unfortunately. Now, as a human being, you really don't want to see someone die like that. The natural instinct reaction is, please don't do that. And hence, Tibetan administration, we have issued statements and appeals to Tibetan inside Tibet not to resort to drastic actions, including self-immolation. But it continues. And as a Buddhist, like people of any faith, we have organized prayers for those self-immolators, particularly those who have died. And as a Tibetan, because they are sacrificing for Tibetan people, we have to show solidarity, at least for the voices, at least for the cries that they're dying for. Hence, I travel around and say, this is the number, and these are their demand or expectation and aspiration. They just want simply to see His Holiness Dalai Lama return to Tibet. And as mentioned by Peter, and also that in this club also, His Holiness has visited a few times. He can be heard, seen, and met by people around the world, but not by Tibetans inside Tibet. And this, the Tibetan inside Tibet, are saying we want to have. And then one particular aspect of the self-immolators is that they all, I think, all of them, except 1 or 2 maybe, were below the age of 50, which means none of them have met His Holiness Dalai Lama. None of them have seen us. They were born and brought up under Chinese system, Chinese political system, education system, economic system. So, because they were brought up under the communist system, if they're protesting against a system which did not deliver the promise of socialist paradise made in 1950s by the Chinese government. So, unfortunately, for the Chinese government to blame that somehow the self-immolation has to do with Tibetans outside is groundless in the sense they all grew up under Chinese system, Chinese education system, no interaction. And also one particular point is that of all these 42 self-immolators, none of them, no one has hurt or harmed anyone except themselves. So their motivation is for Tibetan people. Their intention is to not to harm anyone. Their action obviously is tragic, but that's the act, the political message they wanted to convey. So this is the situation inside Tibet. And unfortunately, till date, the Chinese government is refusing to respond positively to our gestures, because what Tibetan administration seek is genuine autonomy within China, which means within the framework of the Chinese constitution. We want to solve the issue of Tibet within the framework of the Chinese constitution or as per Chinese laws. And we have submitted a document in 2008 called Memorandum of Genuine Autonomy, and a note attached to that in 2010 explaining within the Chinese laws, we could have genuine autonomy for Tibetan people. But so far, not much, no positive reciprocity from the Chinese government side, and this is where we are. So, with that note, I'll end my short speech and listen to your comments, criticisms, and questions. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Sangay, let me start off the proceedings and ask you a couple of things that might make the position clearer to some of our audience. Do you have any means of judging how much of your activities are actually known and recognised within Tibet?
Obviously, it's very difficult to say empirically how many Tibetans inside Tibet know about what we do in Dharamsala. But I can give you several anecdotes where it can indicate that they know what we do pretty clearly. For example, this January actually, His Holiness Dalai Lama gave a teaching in Bodh Gaya in India, where 200,000 people from 63 countries came. And interestingly, 1,100 Chinese from mainland China, and 10,000 Tibetans from Tibet. So initially I didn't know whether they know of me or know about me, but as soon as they see me, wherever I go, immediately they recognize me, they call my name, and really hold onto my hand as though I am a Lama, seeking blessing. Initially I thought it was a bit embarrassing because I thought I was committing a sin, I'm just a secular guy, can't bless anyone. I used to pull my hand, but they literally hold their hand. And then I gave a talk to them, and all of them came. And it was very moving, very passionate, very emotionally, very emotionally charged event. And then later, and before that also and later, songs have been composed in my honor by Tibetan artists inside Tibet. Songs have always been composed in honor of His Holiness Dalai Lama before. But something new is because on August 8th last year, on the day of my inauguration, His Holiness attended and blessed my election. And in that, in fact, he said something very special. So when he was young, the political authority was handed to him by then Regent Tara Rinpoche in Tibet. Today I'm handing over to democratically elected Lobsang Sangay. That sentence is the basis of our legitimacy, because he was enthroned, but fifth Dalai Lama took over and combined both spiritual and political leadership. From fifth and sixth onwards, it passed on from one Dalai Lama to another Dalai Lama, but 14th Dalai Lama passed it on to my election. Now, the songs inside Tibet is available on YouTube, and someone translated, and there's also an English caption actually, a subtitle rather. One song says, we offer a golden throne to His Holiness, and we have to go and seek His blessing. And they offer a silver throne to Kalun Tripa, and then He will guide us. And there's another song, essentially praising my courage and all that. But what I take from these songs, and also there's some posters and photographs I believe is widely circulated. Whenever there's a gathering of monks, they pray for long life of His Holiness, but also my name is added nowadays. Having said that, it's not me as an individual, because I have never met these Tibet, at least most of them. And then they have never seen me actually, at least most of them. But still, why they're doing it? They're doing it because our Tibetan spirit is strong, solidarity is strong, the underlying consciousness and the connection is very strong. And because I got elected and blessed by His Holiness, they are saying, we support you, we are behind you. Even by composing the song, I'm risking my life. And it's true, two of the artists, one got arrested, and one is on the run, but still they're doing it to pass on a message to us that we know you, we support you. So I was told that the truck drivers, yesterday only, someone who visited Tibet a month ago was telling me many of the Tibetans inside Tibet seem to know me. And then we have a couple of radio programs, the Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, from DC and Norway called Voice of Tibet. It's very much listened to by Tibet inside Tibet. So they are quite familiar with what we do outside, it seems. And their support and solidarity also quite strong.
Well, I ask you that partly because you've described the process that you're now involved in as being the middle step of three. The beginning is often violent and nasty, and the end is very often quick and enthusiastic. So if you do have a solid level of support there, how far off do you think the third phase is?
That's true, because I've said in any freedom struggle, the beginning is brutal but short. You lose your country or you lose your power. The end is pleasant and but also short. Because yesterday only, Mohamed Morsi, I think, from the Muslim Brotherhood, got elected as the president of Egypt. That is sweet but short. Now he has to govern, and we all know how difficult it is to govern. You have to deliver. So the middle for any struggle is the toughest period, So I know someone got to do it, and if you study any struggle, that the crucial part is middle. If that middle is not sustained and strengthened, you collapse. And obviously we are in the middle, and we have to do the best we can to strengthen ourselves so that we can sustain till we reach this short, pleasant ending. But I hope I'm more on the end of the middle than at the beginning of the middle, or the middle of the middle, So that's what I hope. That's why I left my job at Harvard and left America and central heating, often I say that, and go to Dharamsala. You all are welcome to come to Dharamsala. In Dharamsala, it's warmer outside the house than inside the house in winter. So you have to make do with the sun outside than the central heating, which we don't have. I've returned and I've substituted, I often say this, for coffee with Indian chai. So I'm doing fine, Thinking because India is much nearer to Tibet. I don't want to miss this, short, sweet time. So I hope I'm end of the middle. Having said that, whether I'm the middle of the middle or not, it's our struggle. We have to take on the leadership and fulfill the aspiration of the elder generation and build on the legacy of an elder generation who worked so hard, sacrificed so much for Tibetan people. So this is the challenge given to the younger generation. So with the blessing from our elders and the legacy that they have left, a remarkable legacy, we will build on, and we will climb the mountain top and reach there. Because why? We have always climbed Himalayan mountains.
Well, in the same vein, there's a generational change about to take place in China itself. Do you have great expectations of that?
Well, I don't know which country has great expectations, but given our past 50 years of experience, no matter how many leaders change, the result has not been that optimistic, except for a brief period in the 80s when Hu Yabang and Tao Ziyang had more liberal-oriented mindset, and there were some reforms and liberalization in Tibet. Other than that, actually, the 50 years, we can say even 60 years, we didn't have much reason to be optimistic. But as a human being, I remain hopeful, because without hope, your meaning of life changes. So I remain hopeful that the new leadership, Xi Jinping as the president, and most likely Li Keqiang as the Prime Minister, and it looks like the composition seems interesting. Some say Wang Qishan, the Vice Premier, will become one of the members of the Politburo, and also Wang Yan from Guangdong. We all read about the Wukan village episode, but it seems they retracted a bit. But it all depends the composition of leaders. but it looks like composition will be a little bit cosmopolitan in nature. Jiang Zemin time, all 9 of them were engineers, if I'm not wrong. The Hu Jintao, technocrats, or rather party apparatchik, Russian trained mainly. But now it looks like princelings, they have interesting background. But on Tibet, no one has been able to change. But new people, hopefully new perspective on Tibet, and perhaps, we'll have better days ahead.
Well, let's move on to questions from some of my colleagues. Here's one from Tony Melville.
Tony Melville, Director of the National Press Club, and I've got a follow-up as well. But just firstly, you're dealing with countries around the world. You're Prime Minister of the government in exile. Do you have diplomatic recognition, if you like, from many countries? And is that an ambition for you? And how does that affect your dealings with China and your Chinese interlocutors?
We don't have official recognition by any governments. But that is not our primary objective. Tibetan administration primary objective is to how best to elevate the sufferings of the Tibetan people inside Tibet. That is our, so wherever we go, we don't make that request informally or formally for diplomatic recognition, but we function in the informal world. For example, we do have an office here, Tibet Information Office. Sonam Nobu Thakpala is our representative here. So in 11 different countries, we have in the US and Geneva and Brussels, even Moscow and South Africa. So we do have representatives, and they have their function. Obviously, when they go meet the officials from the foreign ministry, they meet not inside the foreign ministry, but often at a coffee house near the foreign ministry. But sometimes, some countries, they do allow actually our staff to enter and then have formal meetings as well. So it depends which country and how you do it. But we don't have, but that is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is how best to solve the issue of Tibet. So that's where our focus is, that's where our energy is.
And a back to basics question, I think. I mean, this is a very well informed audience here. But just talking about your ultimate goal. I mean, an ultimate goal for a government in exile would be total independence for ultimate. But what's your ultimate realistic goal? After 60 years in exile, what would you consider to be success in terms of your campaign over these years?
I think I did share, but for Tibet and Tibetan people, genuine autonomy, as I said, within the framework of the Chinese constitution is the official policy of the Tibetan administration and remains so. And we think it's a win-win proposition because Chinese government always say, we don't want someone challenging China's sovereignty, territorial integrity. These are 2 of the primary concerns. Yes, we are not challenging that. What we are seeking is genuine autonomy for Tibetan people. So that is our goal as far as Tibet is concerned. But domestically or within the Tibetan community, to keep the Tibetan solidarity, the Tibetan spirit, Tibetan consciousness alive and strong. And obviously internationally to seek support, meet old friends here and make new friends and keep building the Tibetan movement. And most importantly, to keep hope and aspiration alive for Tibetan inside Tibet. They are the most important component of the freedom struggle. So a lot of roles to play, and administratively, Tibetan administration is run like any other government because we have 3 branches of the government. Judiciary, which essentially try civil cases based on arbitration law. We can't try criminal cases because that affects Indian sovereignty. And then Parliament, which meets twice a year for budget session and the general session. And it's like any other parliament. I don't know whether it's as active as the Australian Parliament, but equally quite, they're vocal, and we have 0 hour as well, where they can stand up and ask us any question they want. So it functions like any other government. And then obviously Parliament session is coming in September, which is, maybe I can say it, not the days the executive branch look forward to, but you have to sit through 2 weeks of the session. So it functions like, and then we have 7 departments. Department of Education runs about 70 plus schools, primary, middle, and high school, and then also provides scholarship for Tibetan students who do well to go to colleges. And then Department of Religion oversees, not run, but oversees 250 some monasteries and nunneries. And Department of Religion and Culture also, teach and then keep aware of Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, Tibetan custom. So, Finance Department, and then Department of Information International Relations is essentially our foreign affairs, and they deal with all other countries and NGOs and human rights NGOs, environment NGOs. And we also have China Outreach, China Dex. So fairly active administrative matters as well.
Here's a question from Peter Phillips.
Dr. Sangay, Peter Phillips, one of the directors of the National Press Club. Welcome to Australia and welcome to the National Press Club. Can I just ask, since your assumption of office, which has given some different status and character to the nature of the Tibetan presence in Dharamsala, how has that changed the nature of the relationship with the government of India, host government of India? Has that brought about any change? Does it give you or the Tibetan community in Dharamsala any reason to reflect upon the possible duration of the presence in Dharamsala of a community which is now headed up by, formally, a government in exile? That's the first part of the question. I have some other parts, but I'll ask you to answer that one first.
Sure. Now, as far as India and Indian government is concerned, for Tibetans, India has been the most generous and most supportive, in the sense largest number of Tibetans are in India, and the Tibetan administration is in India as well. In the last 50 years, their support, humanitarian, has been very strong, and it has not changed. And while in Delhi, I interact with many Indian leaders, and then there is no indication that that is going to change anytime soon. And in that sense, I think we will be continue to be in India, and we will continue to get the same support that the Indian government and people have given us for all these years.
Just before Peter asks his other questions, could I, one connected with what you just said, do you think it's your presence has had any significant negative effect on India's relations with China?
My presence, I don't think so. Maybe added negative, because as it is, Chinese government consider our presence in India negatively to begin with. His Holiness is already labeled in many ways, including calling His Holiness demon and all that. So, and then my presence hasn't added, as far as Chinese government is concerned. Obviously now they see the secondary voice, this other guy who's traveling around and making noises. So I'm sure they're annoyed, and they have called so actually, several names also, colorful ones sometimes. But they will continue to do so. But as far as India is concerned, I don't see much negativity so far.
Peter Phillips again.
Dr. Sangay, under the Chinese constitution, Tibet is regarded and described as an autonomous region, in much the same way as the Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region or the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, Mongolian Autonomous Region. In your 2008 memorandum submitted to the Chinese, in which, again, Tibet or the Tibetan regime outside China articulated a goal to secure recognition as an autonomous region. Is there any meeting of the minds? Because definitionally it would seem that what exists in Chinese constitutional terms and what Tibet seeks has considerable similarity. That is, status as an autonomous region under the authority of, or as a part of the People's Republic of China. In your initial dialogue, even at the most unofficial of levels, is there any indication that there could be some possibility of meeting of minds between your government and the government of the People's Republic of China on the issue of the future status of a Tibetan autonomous region?
Before 2008, we have always said we seek genuine autonomy within China and within the framework of the Chinese constitution, and the Chinese representative who were talking to the envoys of His Holiness Dalai Lama asked, what do you mean by genuine autonomy? Give us in writing. Just put it in context. Envoys of Dalai Lama met with the Chinese counterpart 9 times from 2002 to 2009. And the final one was in 2010, January 2010. So there was already a dialogue going on between two sides. So when finally the Chinese asked, what do you mean by autonomy? We gave in writing the memorandum of genuine autonomy. And then I think 6 chapters, and all the chapters were explained by quoting or citing Chinese constitutional provisions. He said, this is what we mean by Tibetan culture. This is what is provided in Chinese constitution. This is how we want to use Tibetan language. This is what the Chinese constitution says. So we have, cited Chinese constitutional provisions to support what we were seeking as genuine autonomy. And then they said, well, this document is not enough. We think there's hidden independence in this document. Then the note in January 2010 was submitted. And then still no response, no positive response from the Chinese government side. Because till then we thought perhaps they want in detail what we mean by genuine autonomy. And when we started quoting Chinese provisions and said, constitutional provisions, said, this is what we mean by autonomy. Now either they should say, this provision is wrong, it contradicts the Chinese constitution, or they should say there is hidden independence somewhere here. But that discussion hasn't happened, unfortunately, since January of 2010. Otherwise, we thought we can meet, they can be meeting our minds from our side is concerned, because it is as per the Chinese laws. Essentially what we are saying is if you implement your laws, that could amount to autonomy. And what or how much moderate or liberal that, we can be. So it is for the Chinese government to respond now.
Your own unofficial dialogue, and your own unofficial or direct dialogue with Chinese officials or with representatives of organisations such as the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences or such organisations, any sign of any movement there?
No, actually, generally, because the last 16 years that I spent at Harvard Law School, I've met with hundreds, maybe up to 1,000 Chinese students and scholars from China. Generic line is, as long as you don't pursue independence, as long as you don't challenge China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, anything is all right. And many also say you can have, one country, two system like Hong Kong also. That's the generic response. Even the scholars say we ought to solve this problem because it's not getting better, it's getting worse and worse. And it's a bit embarrassment for Chinese people as well. You have to explain why you're treating Tibetans the way you're treating. And one issue I can raise, Hong Kong, when someone says, oh, why can't Tibetans have like one country, two system like Hong Kong? They will say, well, immediate response is Hong Kong already had a commercial system and legal system, under British. So we recognize the same status, so that's why you can't have it. Then we point out and say, what about Macau? Macau was a crime-infested island. All the criminals from China fled to Macau, for some time. But Macau was also granted one country, two system, almost exactly the same basic law of like Hong Kong. Now they have granted autonomy, the high degree of autonomy, that's the word for Hong Kong, and also Macau. Now they are willing to do so for Taiwan. We will recognize status quo of Taiwan. One China, two interpretation. Now one China, two territories, all kinds of definition going on. But essentially what the Chinese government is telling people in Taiwan is, we will recognize the status quo as long as you recognize one China. Now the point is this, Chinese government has granted autonomy to Hong Kong and Macau. They're willing to grant to Taiwan. Why not to Tibetans? This is not a constitutional or institutional problem, because Article 4 of the Chinese Constitution, or if you want, Article 31 of Chinese Constitution, Basic Law, or Article 12 of Minority Nationality Act of 1984 of China clearly says you can have autonomous regional autonomy, right? Now, they're willing to grant for Taiwan autonomy. That means they also have the political will to grant autonomy or recognize autonomy if they want to. But why not to Tibetans? So the message seems to be, you Tibetans are not Chinese. They all are Han Chinese or Chinese, and we give them autonomy because we trust them. You are Tibetan. We don't trust you, we don't want to give you autonomy. That could be an explanation. Otherwise, it's not a constitutional problem, it's not institutional problem, or lack of political will. Shenzhen, any business people who are here, if you go to, Shanghai, they're quite free, right? They have developed, and they have quite a bigger freedom as well. But they all happen to be Han Chinese or Chinese. But unfortunately, that's the message seems to be. So is this a racial issue?
So is that also reflected in the day-to-day lives of the people in Tibet? I mean, has living conditions worsened appreciably? I remember, for example, all the publicity surrounding the opening of the direct rail service, which was going to be a big developmental factor. Mm-hmm. Now the place is virtually closed off.
Mm-hmm. Now, railway line and the economic development. Yes, there has been economic progress. The livelihood of Tibetan people and Chinese migrants in Tibet has improved. Infrastructure has developed. We don't deny all that. But the question is, does that justify occupation? Because infrastructure in Bhutan has also developed. Infrastructure in Mongolia has also developed. Livelihood of Mongolians and Bhutanese have also improved. They're on their own. So, which means we could have done all this on our own as well. Now that's number one. Number two is the economic progress that is happening in Lhasa. Who are the primary beneficiary? And I'll throw the figure, 70, 50, and 40. 70% of businesses in Lhasa are owned or run by Chinese. 50% of public sector, including Communist Party members in Tibet Autonomous Region, are Chinese. Now the Chinese government says 92% of population in Tibet Autonomous Region is Tibetan. Only 8% is Chinese. Okay, if that's the figure, why 50% of Communist Party members in Tibet Autonomous Region are Chinese? Now you're not just talking about the top elite. Obviously majority are Chinese and power holder are Chinese. The judges, the rubber stamp, but their legislation, and as well as the executive branch, the Communist Party secretary. Party secretary is the most powerful person. Never been a Tibetan in Tibet. Now, 40% of high school and college graduates in Tibet are unemployed. Meaning, even if you study hard and get a degree, you didn't get jobs. Hence, overall, Tibetans say, you know what? They are building infrastructure, majority are controlled or dominated by Chinese, and we are not benefiting. For example, I have a picture which shows, I think it's early 90s, which shows a picture outside a Chinese shop, which says, job available, apply within. If you are Chinese, we give you 50 renminbi a day. If you are Tibetan, we give you 30 renminbi a day. How would an Australian feel if there is a shop and advertisement says, if you are Chinese, we give you 50 Australian dollar a day, and if you are Australian, we give you $30 a day. How would you feel? That's in the capital city of Tibet, Lhasa, the holy city of Tibet. That's an open advertisement. So that kind of discrimination and mindset is there. So in that sense, there's element of Han chauvinism, as we all know, Tungguo, the Middle Kingdom, then periphery all are barbarians, which means immediate periphery happens to be Tibetans. We are barbarians. But by the way, all those people, periphery and beyond, are also barbarians. So that includes Australian also, you see.
Well, Doctor, there might be a problem in talking to some ministers, but not all politicians are opposed to being identified with the Tibetan cause. Here's a final question today, in fact, from Michael Danby.
Thank you, Ken. Dr. Sangay, welcome to Australia. The Tibetan Central Administration's obviously made a responsible decision in trying to discourage people in Tibet from being involved with the immolations. But I think you made a very profound point that these people are only harming themselves. They don't seek to harm other people. To me, it's a very profound point because other people who sort of blow up people all over the world, they get a lot of attention, they get a lot of money, they get a lot of assistance, and there's an injustice in that difference, in my view. But my question, I wanted to follow up what Mr. Randall asked you about changes in China. Traditional Western conception was China will prosper, China will become middle class, China will adopt human rights, China will have a more fair treatment of minorities. This obviously hasn't happened. Particularly the last 15 years it's got worse. With the new princelings that are going to be elected to the Politburo, to the Standing Committee, can you drill down into any of them? Are there any hopes with some of the people you mentioned, their histories with Tibet, their histories with the minorities?
Well, the whole modernization theory, the economic progress will lead to middle class, and they will demand freedom, and there will be space, and China will become the liberal country is yet to be seen. And from Spratly Island to South China Sea to Scarborough, you can see the military adventurism or assertiveness is on the rise. And what kind of China will we see in years to come is very important. And how we deal with it is also very important. As far as Tibetans are concerned, even though we are few in number, but what we try to share is that we have lived side by side with Chinese for thousands of years. So we are genetically disposed in understanding them. So the China that the rest of the world see and say, oh, what is this China? So we have seen them before. We have dealt with them before. They have invaded us from time to time. We have invaded them once or twice. Also occupied the capital, and we understand them. So the scary scenario that China is then say, the whole world has to bow or kowtow to China. And also business, they say, oh, if you don't appease China, then you don't get business deals. As I mentioned, I think Confucius pragmatism. If they can get a cheaper iron ore or coal from any other country, they'll go and buy it from that country, not in Australia. Let's be very clear. There is no concession as such, So some say, oh, by not meeting the Lama, perhaps Australia might do something better. But Barack Obama has met His Holiness Dalai Lama. America and China continues to have their relationship. David Cameron and Nick Clegg met the Lama recently. Aung San Suu Kyi met, Prince Charles met. And then while I was in Australia, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister of Australia met. And when I was in Canada with His Holiness, the Prime Minister Harper also met with His Holiness Dalai Lama. There is no end of the world, so to speak, in these countries, But the message that they send, in fact, there's a quote, I think from David Cameron and also from the Chancellor of Australia. We meet with whoever we want to meet. We decide who we want to meet. That was the quote. Because unless really, unless you stand up not aggressively, not insultingly, but stand up for your basic principles, basic values. Then as I said, the Tungguo, the Middle Kingdom, the rest are barbarians. They'll treat you like one. They'll say you are one. They'll buy you if you think you share money over morals. They will throw money at you. But the question is, who do you become? A human being with conscience, human being with values, or a commodity? And they will deal accordingly. And I think, as a human being, people look at me and say, what you did is crazy. You left America, Harvard, and moved to India. I said, it's nothing crazy. This is my cause. This is my struggle, with or without support from outside. We have to keep the struggle alive, and we will. And then I'm not that old, but old enough to remember that during our days, my father was a fanatic, radio listener. He always says, Soviet Union, Soviet Union. He always listens Soviet. He understands only Tibetan. It's going to be number one. Well, late 80s, Berlin Wall. And I met recently Nobel laureates, and the former president of Poland told me, Lech Walesa, actually, he was meeting the chancellor and the foreign minister of Germany, the West Germany, a few days before the Berlin Wall collapsed. And then he was asked, what do you think will happen with all this youth and students surrounding Berlin Wall? And he told them, he said, it's going to come down. The foreign minister reportedly said, well, we want to have that kind of problem, but unfortunately, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. The foreign minister of West Germany said. It collapsed a few days later. Nelson Mandela, we all thought, we have read his book, right? We have read his books, and he said, he's in prison, Robben Island, isolated prison. He walked out majestically, elegantly, and restored democracy in South Africa. Then all the scholars, I think most of the one I have read, they said, Islam and democracy are incompatible. They cannot go together. Arab Spring swept through Arab countries. Where is Hosni Mubarak? Where is Gaddafi? It all happened just within some years. Then people say, that's Arab, that's Europe. Aung San Suu Kyi just got released. Who would have thought just 3 months ago she will come out, she will fight for election, she will sweep the election, and she will finally receive a Nobel Prize, and go to England, meet her family members, and back in Burma. Hey, it's happening in Asia also. So whether Australia leans towards West or Asia, the trend is coming, universality of freedom. And there I think we have to be together, not just for Tibetan people really, for the common values that we ought to have. If you don't have that, we also will change the world. But unless you make small contribution and change in your own ways, you are not going to change the world. So that I think, I often say this actually, why I'm in this, because at the end of my life, when I look back, I don't want to die with regrets, thinking I could have done that for Tibet, done this for Tibet. I want to die thinking I have done all I can, all I could. And I think my daughter will be in a better place, and she will continue the struggle. And I want to sleep at night, better thinking I did the best I could today. So this is the challenge we have, and the Chinese leaders are coming, and no matter who comes, unless there is a stand-up from the world, they will behave how the world behave towards them. If the world bend towards them, they'll make you keep bending, and Chinese word, which was made famous before, kowtow. If you stand up, they respect you. That's Chinese. That's very, very Chinese. I remain hopeful, because universality of freedom, the wave of freedom is sweeping through the world, will also sweep through Asia, definitely. And that's why, I've taken this position. I'm not crazy. I have a law degree, for Pete's sake. I'm quite skeptic by training. But I see this happening, and this is the opportunity I see, and really appreciate it. I know any event that is organized for Tibetans is being watched, and really, Peter and all of you, really for hosting me. It reflects your courage. It reflects that you are standing for values. It reflects that you are standing for principles. And all of you who are here, your presence itself is a major contribution towards justice in the world, towards peace in the world, and towards non-violence in the world. And with that kind of world, we all will be a better place, and our day will come. And then you all come to Lhasa, and before that, do come visit me in Dharamsala. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sangay, we'd like to give you a commemorative pen to sign the agreements that you're looking for, and if
Yes.
and if you're coming back soon, here's a membership of the club, which we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I'm a member of National Press Club of Australia. My number is 3220. Yeah. Now you're also a member of Tibetan people. Thank you very much. Yes. White collar, 8 auspicious signs. So hopefully good health and good luck and everything. Thank you very much.